So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for showing up. And so before beginning, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Young Ha and all at the Oxford Brookes Healthy Aging and Care Network for inviting me to speak today. This is particularly useful as it provides me with an opportunity to think through the research that I'm currently conducting. So I'm in the middle of all of this, so it's very kind of messy at my end. And it's good to be able to test this out on an audience. So thanks for everyone for taking the time to come and listen to me. The main questions that I want to address today, well, in part, I guess, are what is the relationship between design, intergenerationality, and healthy aging? And what challenges and opportunities arise from intergenerational design? And how can these facilitate well-being and reduce loneliness? So just a little bit, really, a little bit of something to do. So there's a fair bit of work addressing the first question. There's also extensive research on intergenerational programming, on how generations live together. In view of this, you would not be mistaken for wondering why I would be interested in examining this topic further. However, as far as I'm aware, there is no other ethnographic research that starts from what I term design thinking and practice, or what might be called the generative potential of bringing design thinking to bear on salient social, political, economic, and material problems. I've also kept the talk theory light on purpose, which in many ways goes against the grain for me. And I would appreciate all comments or objections at the end. So let's begin. So can we have the first slide, please?
Yeah.
So this is the title, Design, Intergenerationality, and Healthy Aging, Challenges and Opportunities. Have the next slide, please. So what I'm interested in here is design and aging. And I want to ground this in the anthropology of architecture and the anthropology of design. But I'm quite unhappy about the anthropology of design, to be honest with you. It isn't really providing me with a firm basis, a firm theoretical basis to think with. So that to me is a very good thing. I'm also interested in aging in the built environment in a more practical sense. And I'm very, very interested in living together, connectivity, and social ties. Can I have the next slide, please? So these are some of the things that I'm also interested in, the future. And from my extensive engagements with the anthropology of time and of the anthropology of the future, there is a sense that the future is this intangible and slippery temporal domain. Although it's certainly enigmatic, the future is something we live with every day. And this is particularly the case for designers and architects whose thinking and practice is future-oriented. So what can we expect in the future? How can we plan for the future? And what is the role of design in this? Can I have the next slide, please? So my aim is to think of architecture and design as disciplines that share a concern to explore the creative processes that give rise to the environments we inhabit and the ways we perceive them, including in it are questions concerning the generation of form, the energetics of force and flow, the properties of materials, the weave and texture of surfaces, and the atmospheres and volumes and the dynamics of activity and of the rest of making life and placemaking. So this is a quotation by Tim Ingold, and I've engaged with Ingold extensively in the past. And one of my criticisms of Ingold is that there's no analysis of political or economic forces or properties. So I want to bring that. So I want to bring the political and the economic into phenomenology. So we might say that I'm concerned with the generative potential of life lived in particular places and how architecture and design can facilitate this in the context of intergenerational living. Can I have the next slide, please? So I don't want to kind of reinvent the wheel, but I think everyone here knows the kind of demographic and social changes that face us. There's going to be a huge increase in older adults. We're living longer, but not in good health. There's a care crisis, and there's also a housing crisis. So this is the practical side of the research. This is the applied side of the research. Can I have the next slide, please? So in a sense, it's asking what can be done. And I know this question sounds a little like the Soviet call to revolution. It sounds like Lenin, but hopefully my interests are much less extreme. In fact, well, they are. That said, the designers I've been working with do want to facilitate social change through their innovative design thinking and practice. Can I have the next slide, please? So what they are interested in is designing and delivering new housing types to deliver and design intergenerational living communities so that intergenerational care, and I don't just mean care for older adults, but care for all people, all generations of people can be provided, and healthy aging. And that doesn't just mean older adults, of course, that means everybody across the life course can be facilitated and loneliness reduced. And again, this is not just about older adults. Can I have the next slide, please? So what architects have told me in relation to all of this is that there needs to be a change in thinking. And this is like a red rag to a bull for a philosophically minded anthropologist, and has led me to consist of what this change of thinking might consist of. Could I have the next slide, please?
Is this right one, Anthony?
It should say evolution of housing typologies.
Yes, yes.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful, thank you. So from their perspective, they say that this change should involve an evolution of housing typologies, moving from standard housing designed for units such as nuclear families, etc., to buildings that can accommodate different familial and social arrangements. By living together with their grown children, home-owning older adults would be able to release equity from their homes as well. This could also help to mitigate the effects of the care crisis. So living well together, sharing space to grow. And the concept of inhabitation is very, very interesting to me. And I've focused on this extensively in previous work. Commensality, eating together, this age-old practice that humans engage in. And I can remember reading in Andrew Weil, who I think is a medical doctor but was interested in the biochemistry of nutrition. And one thing that he had researched was the fact that eating together might be just as healthy as the nutrients that are in food. But of course, there's constraints, market and political constraints, and also a conservatism in the housing market. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is the Yuma Dome in Arizona. It's an intergenerationally designed building. And this is what it looks like inside. And here you can see the way that the architects have thought about how to bring people together organically in the design. And again, this is the kind of fisheye lens view of the interior of the Yuma Dome. And I know that this is, this might seem like beyond the means of most people, but some of these ideas are filtered through into British and European architectural practice. So what the architects for this particular building and the architects I've been working with are interested in is, can I have the next slide, please? How space flows, facilitating organic intergenerational relations through spatial design and organization. And we can see this in the Yuma Dome. Open space to encourage shared living, bringing nature and natural light inside for well-being. And there's really good work in neurology at the moment on natural light and what it does to the, not just to circadianism, but also to our engagement with the world, and how this engagement through light can make us happier. Again, commensality, living together, and also independence, which is something that I think the older adults, at least in Europe and in Britain, definitely want to have or want to maintain. Can I have the next slide, please? So I hear you all say, well, that's alternative architecture. That's a radical built form, and it would be unworkable as a more general design. However, this appears not to be the case. Could I have the next slide, please? People the world over have been living this way for millennia. And this is a photograph I took of the Humley camper, a group of mobile traders, or what used to be called nomads. I can't say that word anymore because I've written against it, in the far west Nepali Himalayas. And what you can see in this picture is two generations, grandparents and grandchildren, sharing space, eating in the middle. And what goes on here is that there's tents facing here, and they're all family. And the children are living in the middle, are playing in the middle with the adults watching over them, and then with the grandparents also watching over them when their parents go away to transport medicinal herbs. What's of significance here is that perhaps this tent is one of the oldest modes of shelter known to humans, but it facilitates intergenerational relations. Could I have the next slide, please?
Anthony, is this the right slide or not? Because I couldn't see the photo of the.
Oh, okay. It should, yeah. No, it should be a photograph. Yeah, it should be a photograph of a woman sitting on the ground.
Oh, here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So I mean, sorry, people didn't get that, but this is an old mode of living. I mean, this was taken in 2014. These people still live like this, and this mode of living facilitates intergenerational relations. Can I have the next slide, please?
This one?
This would be slide 18, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a Chinese courtyard house, or a hutong. And again, you can see in the middle, the courtyard area facilitates intergenerational relations. And this is what the streets of Beijing used to look like. But you can see high-rise buildings in the background, so you can see what's coming. But I was talking to a Chinese colleague, and he says there's lots of existent hutongs in Chinese cities. In one city in particular, of course, the price of real estate rules this out in some cases, because to build vertically is more economically advantageous than to build horizontally. But it still shows that this could be a productive future-oriented design regarding a way to offset the future demographic changes that we'll experience in the next few decades. What I thought was interesting about courtyard houses was, can I have the next slide, please? That the design has existed for over 5,000 years. There's archaeological evidence that goes back further, apparently, but I didn't really have time to look this up. But there is evidence of it going back 5,000 years. And hosts 3 or 4 generation extended families, facilitates shared intergenerational space, has cosmological significance. This may sound like something that a building in the UK might not have, but it depends what you mean by cosmological, I guess. Promotes health and harmony, both socially through Confucianism and with nature through Taoism, and based on the principle of filial piety, care and respect for one's parents. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, you might think that these hutongs are a thing of the past, but this is a contemporary courtyard house in China, and they're built to have this shared space in the middle, but also privacy. People, have their own front doors. but they can all see if children were playing out here, or if an older adult had some problem. It's not like a long terrace of houses where you can't see where they don't oversee one another. So there's architectural design that's been looking at these kinds of things for an extremely long time. And this was designed by a colleague of mine, Donia Zag, who was once a Brooks architectural student, actually. And this is her design for contemporary courtyard housing that she's trying to implement in Chinese contexts. So this is not a thing of the past. This is also something that architects and designers are trying to, which are future oriented. Could I have the next slide, please?
Is this the one?
Oh yeah, we're on the wrong one again. Sorry, that was my fault, Young Hao. Can we have the next one is of high-rise housing.
Oh, okay.
I think it's 23.
I can't see any, the number of.
Oh, sorry.
Slides.
Yeah, it's flats. Yeah. So this is also a design, but in Singapore called the Kapung, and here this is a complex where they have houses, hairdressers, all sorts of facilities to facilitate intergenerational relations. And a colleague of mine who studied these kapongs and intergenerationality in Singaporean contexts, she had a problem. And we were at a conference and she said to me, we have a problem, because we've built these vertical intergenerational houses and they're not being taken up. So we brainstormed it out. And what we come up with is, it sounds like a cliche, but this is what it seems to be, or in part what it seems to be, that people don't want to live with them. In Korea, in Singapore, people don't want to live with their mother-in-laws. So there's all of these, primary anthropological areas of research that we can draw upon to try to understand why these projects work or why they don't work. Could I have the next slide, please? So all of these architectural forms have inspired intergenerational design in the UK. So the designers and architects that I've been working with have all said that they drew inspiration from these forms, apart from the tent. That was one of mine. I couldn't resist putting that in. And this is what one of the architect firms has come up with. This is a model of a multi-generational typology. Typology is just design nomenclature for building. So you can see here how on the bottom floor, what is on the right-hand side is a building for older adults to live in. And then in the other building on the right, this is for their children and their grandchildren to live in. But one of the things that the designers were keen to put into this design was that there would be an open kitchen area at the bottom for people to sit and eat together, and some other considerations, which we'll come to in a minute. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is what it looks like. This is the end result. So these have been very, very successful and have been bought for purpose. In fact, one of the designers who designed it bought one. They were offered at an affordable rate. They're in London, so probably more expensive than other areas of the UK. And affordability is always the problem. It's always the problem for designers who want to implement different modes of building, as well as other things. Can I have the next slide, please? So one of the things that this architectural firm, or at least the designer of this typology, stressed to me was that she was trying to do was to implement or facilitate togetherness and independence. This is what's driven the design. And independence is instantiated in the front door. Each building has its own front door. And togetherness is facilitated by the courtyard and kitchen and dining area. But one of the things that they thought was very, very important was this mix of togetherness and independence. So togetherness, so people could dine together, live together, care for each other, but also had a front door so they could leave and have privacy. And I think this is very important in a UK context. So what are the challenges of implementing these kinds of designs? Can I have the next slide, Young Ha? Sorry. So what are the challenges? Can I have the next one, please? Firstly, a conservative housing and development industry, profit and market, affordability, urban planning, socio-economic constraints, a lack of foresight, and in the Singaporean context, mother-in-laws. And so can I have the next slide, please? And what are the opportunities that this form of housing could provide? Intergenerational living. Can I have the next slide, please? Reduced loneliness, caregiving, bringing people together, bridging generational divides. We've seen this in other intergenerational programs, tackling ageism, resulting in a more integrated and convivial society. Can I have the next slide, please? So now I want to return back to the future, if you like. Can I have the next slide? So some might say, isn't intergenerational design going backwards? Back to when 3 generations of people lived together, or when people lived in tents or courtyard housing, or hutongs. However, if we're to plan for the kinds of demographic changes ahead, intergenerational homes may be a good way of designing for a better future. This is what the architects are telling me. And I can see the value and the expedience of this. Can I have the next slide, please? And also, intergenerational design keeps winning awards. So I've worked with 3 architecture firms, and each of them have won well, one of them has actually won about 3 for these kinds of designs. So it's not that it's impossible to implement. So it's a truism that architecture and human bodies are involved in processes of co-constitution. It is also correct to say that the future is emergent and often uncertain. It may go too far, however, to suggest that the future is indeterminate. And I mean that it lacks form, always shifting through process of temporal duration. If this were the case, designers and architects would have a difficult job melding materials and creativity together in the pursuit of making the built environment. Day after day, I've sat in designers and architects' office watching them bring the future into the present by giving form to the world. Their expertise is truly astonishing. I've watched them as they start with a plan. They draw it out through by hand and then draw it out on tablets and then onto computers. And we could do worse than to think with them in making a future that may help to reduce some of the problems that we face. And I don't say this without any reservations. I'm usually a very skeptical person, and I'm always thinking about the complexity problem, and always because my background has been in studies of nomads and in travelers, gypsies, and Roma, whereby there's been many policies to both improve and to constrain their lives, and none of them have really worked. In fact, just about all of them have made their lives worse. So I'm always cognizant of what might be called the law of unintended consequences. So in this context of architecture and design, at first I was very skeptical. I was thinking, yes, okay, here's a good idea, but how do we get the conservative housing market, or how do we get a monetized, financially driven economic market to listen to this kind of sense, even if we were to say, well, we have a demographic transition and we have a care crisis, etc., etc. How would we get people, stakeholders involved in implementing these kinds of designs, to listen to the good sense of architects? So my ethnographic research in architects' office has convinced me that design may not be a panacea to all of society's problems, but it appears to be a good place to start. Beside this, as an anthropologist, as any anthropologist worth their salt knows, it is significant, in fact, imperative, to think like one's research participants. So that's what I've actually done here. I've tried to put myself into their heads and think like they do. So that's the end. And if anyone is interested, they can contact me either personally on this first email address. Can I have the next slide, please, Young Hao? Or on our institute's email address. And I would like to say thanks to PRP Architecture and Donia Zag for the photographs. And if there are any questions, comments, or even objections, I'll be very, very glad to hear, either now or via email. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you. It's a great presentation. It's a lot, giving a lot of food for thought. First of all, I will have to give some apologies because Anthony and I are using different, presentation separately. So there was a little bit of, the differences in showing the right presentation. So I think there are the many interest in chat box. So Ben, would you like to complete this the question, please?
Hi there. Yes, I'm Ben Spencer. I'm a research fellow supporting the Healthy Aging Network as well. And yeah, thanks for the many questions that have come in. If I don't cover anything, if I've missed something in the earlier chats that you want to cover, please pop that in again. I think one of the questions that I noticed, which I think is quite interesting, is thinking about, rather than new build, about retrofitting and what kind of approaches could be used to use the existing housing stock.
Yes, yeah. I mean that's. I mean, I'm not an expert in architecture or design, but I mean this has come up, and I mean they're aware of this, and they're also aware of more flexible forms of internal building and architecture, how to make things, how to transform rooms and things like this. And I recently went to Copenhagen and went to the so-called first, even though it's not, because people have been living intergenerationally probably since they were hunter-gatherers, but the so-called first intergenerational community there, and they showed me around the insides of their houses, and it was really impressive how they could move walls around. It's like, and they said, you don't really need to build these like very hard brick walls. All you need is the structure, and then you can do whatever you want inside. But I suppose they have a different architecture environment in Scandinavia. But all of the architects and designers that I've been working with are interested in this kind of flexible approach to interior design, and would like to implement it in their typologies. But I think in relation to retrofitting, yeah, that would be a really good idea. I mean, I'm trying to think if I know of any cases where that's actually happened, which I don't off the top of my head. But yeah, a good idea for sure. I mean, if there's any architects here or designers in the audience, I would be glad to hear from them about that, actually.
Great, thanks, Anthony. So yes, if anyone's got any ideas, please put those in the chat, some existing examples. I've got a couple of people with hands up, so I will come to them now. So Jay, would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, let me get the video back on, start video. Yeah, you're doing exceptionally important work. One of my comments is connecting it to the broader issues of the general movements, largely across Europe and North America, to the age-friendly and intergenerational age-friendly community movements in the broadest context. And going one step down from there, it's really connected to what you're talking about, is the long-standing co-housing community movement, which started in Denmark in the 1970s. And I posted probably the most recent book on that by Catherine Kingfisher. It looks at two places, one in Japan and one in Vancouver, Canada. So the importance of the design stuff essentially has to fit into the first issue of the age-friendly movement context, because that gets into policy, government issues, even changing urban regulations to permit certain kinds of building. It's one thing to design stuff, it's another thing to get a social movement to make it possible beyond a one-shot deal that looks nice, but doesn't become part of availability for a wide range of population. Well, that's my comments. A wonderful discussion, and thank you for it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, if I could respond to that. So I've been looking at co-housing quite a bit as well. And I have one case which I'm just starting to look at. I mean, I haven't done any real research on it. I've done an interview and a bit of background research. And this was a place that was designed for purpose, and it was able to go through the planning and policy and all the kind of political and economic stuff. And they were able to achieve this co-housing community. It's in Cambridge. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And but you know, one of the so I was interested in how they had done it there and how other people weren't able to do it in other places. And what it turns out, it seems, is that it was built on fairly marginal land. Well, marginal land that no one really wanted. It's right up against the motorway. So, you know, it's like, I mean, after with my research with travelers and gypsies who always end up next to the motorway. Right. And you know, I recently wrote a paper on pollution and health in relation to their lives. And when this very middle class older adult lady was telling me about very, very similar issues, you know, how they had been pushed, as far as she was concerned, pushed to the margins, and they were only able to build this innovative design and implement these innovative living arrangements because of that. And I mean, it's quite disheartening in some ways that the only way that something like that can happen is because it's on land that nobody wants, or land that is, you know, has been polluted or something like that.
There are some examples of retrofitting, one from California, I think in Berkeley. Mm-hmm. That is perhaps one of the ways of getting around that, an existing place that is not an environmental hazard. Anyway, Thank you very much for your the presentation and the comments.
Cheers.
Great, thanks very much, Jay. I think Jeremy, you next have your hand up.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Anthony. I enjoyed that. One thing that foxed me though at the end was that you keep on saying that, like me, you're an anthropologist, but then you say you want to think like the people that you're building for. Why not just ask them what they want?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I do. But I mean, I'll give you an excellent example of this. So when I was researching nomads in Tibet and in Nepal, and of course, I was very different to these people. And one of the leaders, even though he isn't really a leader, but I'll have to kind of use that as a gloss, said to me, look, if you want to get a hold of what we are, if you want to get a grip of what we are in that kind of Malinowskian sense, then you're going to have to live and think like us. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? And he said, first of all, we're going to make you some food, this kind of old anthropological thing. We're going to make you some food that you'll hate, and you have to eat it. And it was like, so I was like, okay. And he's like, you have to take our culture. This is his exact words. You have to take our culture into your body. And I thought, okay. I was much younger then, and completely into total participation. I would have done probably anything apart from jumped off a cliff. But maybe I would have done that if there'd been a river underneath. But and then he said to me, so now we're going to get drunk. They love drinking, and I hate drinking. And I drank the Chang, and I was out of my brains. And I went to a political rally for the Maoists, and it was wild. And they tell you in Nepal, if you're from Europe, don't go to political rallies. This way it kicks off, and you're in danger. So it's like, so this is what I mean, because there's this design thinking that's going on with these architects. And when I ask them, well, what is that? It's that old cultural problem. Tell me about your culture. And they're kind of like, oh, I don't really know what that is, because we never really thought about it, because it's just something that we do subconsciously. So it's like, tell me what your design thinking is. I've asked this question. And they just go, and you know how lucid architects are, right? It's like, you just don't get anywhere. So it's like, okay, I'll put myself in the village, so to speak, which is a design office, and then watch what they do. And I mean, obviously you can't think like somebody else, right? It's impossible. But you try and think like them, think in the way that they do, when they're drawing on a piece of paper, pick up a pen and start drawing on the piece of paper with them. I mean, you ruin their design, but at least you're kind of, the connection between the brain, the eye and the hand and the person and the paper and the creativity. I think you probably can think like them.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Anthony. Georgia, over to you.
Oh yes, thank you very much, Anthony, for a very inspiring talk. I have been involved with a number of schemes. I'm from Brooks. I teach in urban design and have worked on a number of retrofitting projects. And the best one, if you want to get a bit more information about, is the work we did with local communities who were our clients in Angeltown, Brixton. And it was a retrofitting project, which was funded by the government under the umbrella of regeneration schemes. Mm-hmm. It was all affordable housing. There was no private, and it's still very much in affordable housing hands. And what we did was we turned horizontal flats, pedways, into vertical townhouses, where on the ground floor, we have accommodation for grandparents, and then on the up floor we have for the families. And it is around the courtyard development, similar to the one you were showing from Donia, who was also trained by us in our center. And it won many awards in terms of both the kind of quality of perception by the residents who enjoy this kind of living. So we offered alternatives in terms of layout, so the different families could opt for different sort of configurations. Some were more horizontal, like you showed from PRP, and some were much more vertical in terms of going for this verticality. And verticality was very important because they said they wanted to live in normal housing, not the social housing. And it's an interesting scheme. I will send you some papers that we have written about it, and you can perhaps visit the scheme when you are next in London.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. That sounds really good. Thanks, Georgia.
Great, thanks, Georgia. You're down as, we've got a hand up from, you're just tagged as admin. So don't know if you want to introduce yourself a bit more thoroughly.
Sorry, I'm Philip Stafford from Indiana, with Indiana University on Commons Planning. I think sometimes we overemphasize the function and the role and the design of the kind of integral housing unit itself, and lose track of the importance of the surrounding context. And I think one of the values of the age-friendly community movement is that it takes a more holistic approach to the concept of loneliness. I don't think families are necessarily the best agents to mitigate loneliness. And it might be the cashier down, at the grocery store, or the waitress in the restaurant, those kinds of things. As colleague social worker in Great Britain of mine, whose name I'm forgetting, I'm sorry, admonishes us to think about. And so we have to kind of reframe the scale and our notions as to what a living unit is all about, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And one thing that was missing from this presentation was something that I've been thinking about recently, and it is, so, we're always thinking about strong ties, but one thing that come up recently was weak ties. And this is what I think you're drawing attention to here, the person who serves you your coffee at Costa every day, the person who you see walking their dog on the grass at 6 o'clock in the morning when you go for your morning walk, these weak ties. And I mean, these weak ties, that they're probably more difficult to implement into, well, maybe not actually, but when I was talking to someone on the project in Cambridge, they were saying that, we all have our lives here. We wave to each other. We all know each other, but there are weak ties here. And they were emphasizing the utility of weak ties in making them feel like they lived somewhere where they knew everybody, even though some of these ties weren't particularly strong. So I think that's definitely something that needs to be looked at. And there's very good literature in psychology on that, I think. A colleague of mine has been working on it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we psychologize aging, we medicalize aging, and focusing on loneliness and its proximity to the clinical side of things is not a good way to go. I think it's more important to focus on a sense of belongingness and membership in Wendell Berry's sense.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip.
I'm just looking on that theme around loneliness. There's a comment in the chat from Robin Hewings about a report that was recently published. Robin, I don't know whether you want to say any more about that. Thanks for that link.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for. So I put it in the chat. Really, just wanted to ensure that people are aware of some of this work. So we're the Campaign to End Loneliness. We do roughly what we say on the tin. But this is an area which we think is a really important policy response to loneliness, because what is so valuable about thinking about design, both about how we design our houses, but also to some extent the world beyond our front door as well, is that a lot of what we do about loneliness is one-to-one services, which are really important, but this has the ability to, in many ways, reach a whole population. And it's something that, from a policy perspective, we have been interested in, but we realised we were a bit vague on what exactly it was that we wanted. And in that report, it's our kind of first attempt to be a little bit more specific about what we want from policymakers, which absolutely was great to see the examples towards the end of the talk from East London, and I'll be certainly looking up the examples from Brixton as well about the ways in which we can kind of better design spaces that really embed connection, because I think that it is, and again reflecting the talk, I think it's something which we've always known is important, but in the kind of quest for kind of housing units and everything else can be lost. And I think it's something which we want to kind of bring back, but bring back in a way that as I've seen some other comments, works in the 21st century and the kind of values and aspirations that we have now. But it's brilliant to have the examples that we're having that we can kind of draw on and look for in other kind of modern settings as well. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to contribute briefly.
Cheers, Robin. Yeah, I'll read the report, and maybe I'll contact you afterwards, and we can, discuss further. Cheers.
That would be great.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Robin, for that impromptu contribution. Got a hand up from Seth. I can't hear you currently.
Still. Hearing. Still can't hear.
How's now?
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, I had to change my default microphone. Thank you. Thank you so much for the really interesting talk. It was the content and the presentation fascinating. I'm a graduate student at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and I'm constructing my dissertation project right now to start in September. And it's looking at so many of these same things that you're hitting on. Designed it as a field study in 3 residential senior care communities in California. Because I had to, pick a place to do it and participants that I could have access to. So these are institutional care facilities, but that have different residential sections. So independent living, where you pretty much buy in with the anticipation that you're going to need more care. Assisted living, and then skilled nursing options. So kind of a sliding scale within one campus of care. So as you need more care, you stay in the same community, but you move from residential space to residential space. One of my key questions as an anthropologist and for anthropologists is I come from a psychological background, and to the point about psychologizing older folks, it's a good one, but one of my main dilemmas is outcome measures. How do we make speculations about, is this going to be good or bad for the people that we're studying? And you mentioned in your research, Anthony, with the nomads, that certain conditions ended up in worse condition. Life was worse. But how we measure the goodness or the badness of life is really interesting. And I've decided to go into positive psychology and the literature there on subjective well-being, which essentially has a cognitive element, how satisfied are you, and an emotional element, what are you feeling right now, and then take those at intervals. So I'm curious, that's, the best way so I'm going to ask people in these environments, these 2 things. I'm going to have a general life domain of satisfaction, and then domain specific, how satisfied are you with your ability to see the people you want to live with, what you're able to eat, how you're able to move around. And then do a momentary emotional assessment that's repeated. How are you feeling now? How are you feeling now? I was curious if you've thought about this type of outcome measure, actually measuring the quality of life or the subjective well-being, or how we might interpret the outcome of these different residential and architectural and design alternatives.
I mean, this is really important. I've never really done any explicit applied research before, but because I've always worked with some of the most marginal communities, they kind of make you do applied research. And I was of the anthropological school that we should just go to the field and we should just understand. And if we could use our specialism for something, then maybe we should. So I've written, reports to the High Court and lots of other things for travelers and gypsies. But I mean, they were my friends, So it was kind of like helping your friends who let you live amongst them. But with this project, it's very different. And there's a huge applied element to it. And I think what you're drawing attention to be able to, evaluate outcomes This is hugely important. And because of unintended consequences, this is also, a huge problem. And, I'm of the thinking that what I start with, I start with the philosophical premise that the world is intrinsically more complex than I can ever imagine, or anybody else can ever imagine, right? So then how do you then scale down from that to be able to, understand a particular case? Well, ethnography is quite good for that, I think, especially long-term co-residential or intensive ethnography. But then if you're working on applied research, how do you then, evaluate your case study? I mean, to be honest, the honest answer to this is, I just don't know. But I think what you're drawing attention to in relation to positive psychology and measures of subjective well-being, I think that that's a good place to start. And I have read some of the literature on this, but I'm not really, I don't really know that much about it, to be absolutely honest. But it's definitely a very, very important consideration. I mean, you know more about it than me, I think.
Thanks, Anthony. We're getting close to end of time. Young-Ha, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Anthony, for your presentation, and then everybody contribution interesting discussion. I think your talk focused on how intergenerational living, and then the relationship, how to release the loneliness and then increase people's well-being. I think this intergenerational approach to particularly built environment context, I think there are, some similarity how to design principle of inclusive the design. But I think this approach can contribute to more than design. So if I may share my experience while I'm visiting Tokyo University in the last May, I visited several exemplar case study sites. And then, that Japan is a super aging society. They are using this intergenerational principle and approach. It's not only for just living, all generations together, but use and help each other and then integrate with the care for all the people. So very interesting, the site is, they are start to, create intergenerational design in community, not only home. And then the main aim is to integrate old people with young people. So there are very interesting, the site is within care home site, they have the playground, school, so that they naturally engage with old people and the little children in playgroup. And also in extra care home, they actually allow some students living with older people so that they naturally in daily life, they can engage each other. So I think they are pushing more this intergenerational living approach into integrate other, outcome, create other outcome, social outcome or health outcome. So I think this is, I only saw in Japan, but I'm sure in UK, there are good examples. For example, in Cambridge, I saw is a really interesting intergenerational, whole community newly built. But I didn't see the care provision is embedded in it. So I think this is we can learn from other international case. You already, as you already showed all international case. So this is a good example. I think, we can measure the outcome, the health outcome, also social outcome from this intergenerational living, environment.
Yeah. Could I just ask you, Young-Ha, that about the, the intergenerational living communities where students and older adults share space. Yeah. So I mean, I've been working on a project like this. And one of the things that seems to happen is that so the students are given subsidized rent.
Yes.
All students need this, right? So therefore, and they give up some of their time to interact with older adults in a residential home, and they live there too. But one thing that I'm noticing, and I mean, this is being copied all over the world. I mean, there's lots of cases of this in the States, and there's some cases. There's a very successful case of this in the Netherlands, and what actually seems to happen is that once incentivization stops, then the program falls to pieces. So once the students are not given subsidized rent, they, you know, even the ones that are kind of socially minded are like, well, okay, I'll have to get on with my studies and I haven't got time or whatever. You know what student life is like. So I'm just wondering about the case in Tokyo. If was this the same sort of thing?
I think that is extra care home, not the normal, you know, the residents who living the old, you know, the people living alone and then share their room with the student. Because this is purposely, developed a program, extra care home setting. They have a student living around so that sometimes they can, some space they can share each other. But I can find out the, place and then give it to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right. I think time's up. Ben, if you don't have any further the question, and then I think we can finish up now. Thank you so much, Anthony, again, for your interesting and inspiring presentation. And also thank you to you all for your participation and interesting questions and discussion raised.